Hi, I'm Mickey Goldberg, or Relic Greenberg. I was born in New York City, uh, November 13th, 1925. Moved to Omaha when I was 8 years old, and spent the next 40 years there, growing up there, being part of the community, until Mort and I were married in 1974, and then we moved to California, and later to Phoenix, where we now reside. My parents were Yetta and Sidney Goldberg, and we came to Omaha because my father had sisters living in Omaha. His sisters, Minnie Epstein, Rose Epstein, and Gussie Turkle, were all residing here. Minnie and Rose, incidentally, married two brothers who owned the Epstein theater chain, and our family came out here to be part of that group. My mother and father both worked for the Epstein brothers in their theater, and in time my father bought his own theater, which was the Lothrop Theater on 24th and Lothrop, which I don't believe is there anymore. My mother worked in the box office. My sister and I took turns in the box office so she could have a rest. As I recall, the adult admission was 15 cents, children were a nickel, popcorn was a nickel, and I remember my father used to cut little holes in the bottom of the sack of the popcorn so the kids couldn't pop them when they were in the show. It was a big treat when my friends came every now and then. My dad would let them get into the theater free, and that was a real big treat. I went to Lothrop Grade School, which was just down the street from where we lived, and I think the only other Jewish kid there at the time was Lois Siegel Enderman. Interestingly enough, Lois and I were friendly in grade school, knew each other in high school, but then kind of lost contact and wound up living next door to each other. We built a house and she built a house next door to us. Our children became friends and their children became friends. So this is part of what Omaha meant to me. It was a continuity of generations from grandparents to children to grandchildren.
Mickey, tell me a little bit about your father.
My father was really rather quiet man, a sweet man who I adored. He was possibly the only man I ever knew that gave me unconditional love. Although he never said he loved me. He never got to a school play because he was busy with the theater. He was very special. My mother, on the other hand, was very gregarious in many ways. I think I took after her. She was a leader in the Jewish community. She was a Hadassah Macher. She was a president of Beth Israel Sisterhood. And I think it was from her that I got the lesson that you have to give back to the community. I was a Macher in the teenage years. I was president of the Round Table, president of the Girls Club, chairman of the Jewish Philanthropies. Everything that a teenager could do in a leadership role, I did. I went to Central High School, as did everybody, and I was a star debater in the National Forensic League, and I haven't stopped talking since.
What are some of the things that you did while you were at Central?
I'm sorry.
What are some of the things that you did while you were at Central?
Well, I was on the debate team. I had a very short stint on the newspaper, and then had a conflict. I tried out for roadshow and never made it. I was involved in practically everything, and Central was a good place. We used to have a whole group of people who rode the streetcar with me down to Central in the morning, and then there was not a question that after school we all went over to the JCC across the street, which really was our second home. We did everything at the J. I'm not sure the new J could ever take the place of what the OJ meant to teenagers. We were at the J every Sunday. We were there to watch the boys' basketball games for girls' club meeting, and if there was nothing else going on, we went there just to be seen, because everybody else was there just to be seen. So it was the hub of our social life. I do remember on December 7th, 1941, we were all at the J, and when we got the news of Pearl Harbor, and I don't think any of us at that time knew where Pearl Harbor was. We certainly didn't know what war was all about. And there were college boys there who wondered if they were going to be drafted, if they were going to be hurt, if they were going to die. The girls were a little bit more provincial. All they wondered about is, if the boys all go to the army, who are we going to date? It was a very strange, very scary time for us. We went home, we talked to our parents about it, and they were scared. They had all experienced war in World War One, but nobody really knew what this was going to be all about. So that was a kind of a made a mark on my life, the whole business of the war, because it interrupted my schooling, certainly interrupted my social life, and we all had to readjust.
Who were some of your friends while you were in high school?
My friends in high school, we had one little clique of girls, which included Ida Epstein Richards, who is still my friend and is still living in Omaha, Etta Gorelick Epstein, who's married to Bay Epstein, who likewise is still in Omaha, Joyce Marks, who left very shortly. Joyce was engaged to Mel Levine, and Mel was killed in the service, and Joyce then moved out of town. Betty Cookland Rubin, who is still in Omaha. Interestingly enough, I still have contact with all of those girls, except for Joyce. So it's been over 60 years, but it was closer to 70 years, I guess, that we've all been friends. The boys in our little group were Yale Richards, Bay Epstein, Max Osterman, who's gone. I can't remember. There were a couple of others, a couple of other men, Milton Gus, who's still in Omaha. In those days, there were cliques. The poor kids didn't go with the rich kids, and the rich kids are the kids who lived in Dundee. The poor kids are the ones who lived on North 24th Street, where all these kids did. And we didn't intermingle, and there was no animosity. We just stayed in our own backyards, which was okay because we all had our own fun in our own time. Fortunately, that's changed. Even the clubs were different then. The UT was the club for the rich girls, and the other girls went to BBG groups. The boys had Roanoke, I think it was the rich group, and then the ACA were for the other ones. It was a real class system, which has dissolved, and that's a good thing. We did dances. We did everything at the J. We did dances at the center on Sundays. We had the big dance of the year was the after Yom Kippur dance. The Yom Kippur night was the Sweetheart dance, and all my friends, including me, ran for Sweetheart. I think Etta was the only one that made it. The rest of us were just has-beens. It was a fun time. On the high holidays, we all walked to synagogue from 24th Street, from North 24th. We happened to live on Spencer. We all walked to the synagogue, to 18th in Chicago, where our parents were. We said hello to our mothers upstairs because we couldn't go down to the downstairs where the men were. And then we left and we stood outside the synagogue and talked. And then we walked over to 19th. We did very little praying, but we did a lot of socializing. But we didn't ride, so that was good. In those days, very few Jewish girls went to college. It was a style that when you got out of high school, you went to secretarial school and you became a secretary and then you got married. I was I think the only one in my group who had the opportunity to go to college. My parents couldn't afford to send me away, so I was going to go to school locally. The only two universities available were Creighton University and the University of Omaha University, which later became the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Creighton was the better of the two schools. That was a Jesuit college, who really didn't take women and certainly didn't take Jews. Mrs. Neveloff, who is a name from way back in the past, I'm not sure too many people remember, was a woman who had her finger in every pot, knew everybody, and was able to do anything. And she said to my mother, she wants to go to Creighton, I'll get her into Creighton, which she did. And I think I was one of 5 women in the school at that time. The others were all Catholic. I was the only Jewish woman. And it was a very strange thing because those girls had all been brought up in parochial schools. They had never met a Jew before. Here they were at college level and they had never met a Jew, and asked me very interesting questions about how we ate and how we slept, as if we were from another planet. Unfortunately, the war at that time, Yale Richards and I talked about possibly going into law together. Yale was I think was in law school at that point. And then the war came along, and he went off to the service. Since Creighton was primarily a male school and all the boys went off to service, the school as a university stopped, and it became a cadet program for the service. And that's when I had to drop out of school there, later to take up courses at Omaha University after I was married and had kids. I started college when I was 16 because that was in the day when they used to skip children, we skip kids in grade school. It was a practice at Creighton University that all Catholic students had to have a religion course. Non-Catholic students had to go to a philosophy course. So of course I went to the philosophy course, led by a wonderful man named Father Bowdern. After a couple of days in class, he asked if I would counsel with him privately rather than do the philosophy class, and I said sure. And we counseled. I met with him, I think, 2 or 3 times a week, and I didn't realize it, but he was really trying to convert me. I must have given my parents a lot of gray hairs because I used to go home and say, why don't we, why can't we, why aren't we, and they didn't have the answers. And I didn't have the answers either, and he nearly had me converted until we got into the Trinity, and I kept asking questions about it. One day he got frustrated. He says, you have to believe. I says, not if I stay Jewish, I don't have to believe. And that was the end of my near conversion to Catholicism. I'll always be grateful to him because it was because of him that I decided I ought to know a little bit more about being Jewish. In Sunday school that day, we never got past the Bible stories. Never got past the first book, the Genesis. I never knew anything beyond that. Certainly never knew anything about Jewish philosophy. And because of Father Bowdern, I went on a course all by myself of learning what it meant to be Jewish. So that, in conjunction with an experience I had at Brandeis Camp Institute, which was at that time sponsored by Hadassah, I found out what being Jewish meant. When I went to Brandeis Camp, it was the first time I had ever seen a Havdalah service. It was the first time I'd ever experienced Shabbat as it should be. So because of these 2 experiences, I am Jewish, very Jewish. Before I was married, I was looking for a job, and I kind of had a way with words, and English was my thing. So I was looking for a job in an advertising agency. Now that was the days when there was overt anti-Semitism. My maiden name was Goldberg, and I'd go into a place and they'd say, Goldberg, that's Jewish, isn't it? Well, we don't hire Jews. I know that the young people now can't relate to that, but that's the way it was. And I do remember the one day that I had been rejected by a number of places, and I walked into an advertising agency called the Mort Duff Advertising Agency. This was a little fat Irishman who was kind of cute, and I asked for a job. He says, well, what do you want to do? I want to be a copywriter. He says, Goldberg, that's Jewish, isn't it? And I got on my high horse and said yes, and that doesn't mean anything except I would be a wonderful employee. And I started to walk out. And he says, now, just a minute, I can't let you walk out of here and have people think I'm anti-Semitic. You want to be a copywriter, but I don't have any copywriting jobs available. Would you take an entry-level job? I says, I'd do anything to get a job. So he says, would you be a file clerk? I said, fine. I probably have to be the worst file clerk in the whole world because I get very, very bored. And after a week, I started putting everything in a miscellaneous file because I didn't want to do it. And then he came to me, he says, you know, you're going to ruin my whole filing system. I'll get you a job as a copywriter. And that's what I did for a number of years. Even after I was married, I did some work at home. My job as a copywriter at Mort Duff Advertising Agency was kind of unique. I didn't do any of the glamorous kind of advertising things. He specialized in hatchery advertising. And I remember spending a lot of time advertising for a place called the Interstate Chick Sexing Institute. And I did lots of stuff for them, and I got apparently my name got on their list for many years. I got stuff from them asking me to come to their school and learn how to sex chicks. But that was again an interesting experience, but none I really wanted to pursue. After my kids were born, I did some part-time work at home. I did Sunday school teaching, both at Beth Israel and at Temple Israel. When my oldest son was a senior in high school, I knew that the only way he could go away to college is if I went back to work. And it was something I really wanted for him. I always felt like I'd missed something by not being able to go away to school. So I was looking for a job. And at that time, there were 2 possibilities. Jimmy Lipsy and Millard Rosenberg, who were running an advertising agency, had an open spot, and I interviewed with them. And the Jewish press job was open. Well, I knew nothing about running a newspaper, But I took that job because the parking was better at the Jewish Community Center than it was at downtown. And that was probably the best job I ever had. I started there on a part-time basis at $50 a week when the paper was really not much more than a Federation house organ. It was 4 pages with a few ads. In fact, Kayla Franklin was running it, and Kayla knew less about writing and newspapering than I did. I think I did things for the Jewish press, and it certainly did things for me. I added some provocative new ideas. I had my sidelines column, which ran the gamut from the serious to the sublime. I introduced teens to the press, and they had their own column. The first person to write a teen talk column was Barbara Jess. I'm trying to think. What it provided me was an opportunity to meet people and go places I would never have been able to go. In the course of my 10 years at the Jewish Press, I met David Ben-Gurion, I met presidents, I met Golda Meir, as well as local dignitaries. I was interviewed Abraham Heschel, Elie Wiesel, all these famous names, all these people that you read about, I had personal contact with, which I never would have had otherwise. So it was a great job for me. I had opportunities I wouldn't have had otherwise, and I loved being there.
How large was the press during those years after you got it going?
After the press was started out for a long time was 4 pages. I finally built it up to 8 pages, and then to 12 pages, and then I introduced some of the special editions. They had a New Year's edition, but it was very limited. It was mostly ads, and then I introduced the Passover edition, and it's been going ever since. I do have to admit that it was not particularly a moneymaker when I was there, but I was a one-woman newspaper. It has now become much more lucrative, but unobjectively, I say it's not as good as it used to be. I was a one-woman newspaper for a long time, which meant I did everything. I did the writing, I did the editing, I did the advertising, I did the selling, the whole bit. Finally, they said, okay, you can hire an assistant. And I put an ad in the Jewish Press, and this young woman came in with this gorgeous English accent and a portfolio, and I was so taken by her accent I didn't even look at the portfolio. But I hired Linda Mervish as my assistant, who was with me until the time I left. After Mort and I were married in 1974, we moved to California, where Mort was the executive director of a new federation there, and I was looking for a job. And through somebody we knew, I got a job as in a savings and loan. And I knew nothing about savings and loans, just as I knew nothing about writing newspapers. But in those days, I had a lot of chutzpah, so I said, okay, I take that job. And they put me to work rewriting their brochures, so that I could understand what a brochure said. At the same time, I learned about the business. Interestingly enough, of the 3 jobs I took, none of them were ever permanent. The first one was a trial basis at the advertising agency that lasted for 10 years. The Jewish Press also was a trial thing that lasted for 10 years. And my job as vice president of Mercury Savings in California was on a trial basis, and that lasted for 16 years. So I really never had a permanent job, but I had 3 very, very interesting careers. Now if we can go back to Omaha and what happened then. In 1945, after the war, I was married to Bob Gorelick, and we subsequently had 3 children. Our oldest, Howard, is vice president of Safeway, living in Denver. He has 2 children, Amy, who's married, living in Denver, and Dan, who is married to a wonderful woman, and fortunately for us is living in Phoenix. So we have this one grandchild living here. My next child, Jerry, went to Westside High School, as all 3 of my kids did. Jerry graduated Westside, went to University of Wisconsin, and finished his college career at the University of Nebraska. My youngest child, Marcia, is married to Steve Pibler and has remained in Omaha, and Jerry has no children. And Marcia has become, as has her husband, a leader in the Jewish community. Steve has been president of the Federation, president of the Jewish Community Center, president of the school board. Marcia has been very involved in the community. She and Jody Malashak chaired the Maccabea Games that were in Omaha a couple of years ago. She and Jody are now chairman of the women's division for the campaign. And I'm very proud of what she's done in terms of keeping up our family tradition about being committed to the Jewish community. She has Steve and Marcia have 3 children. Her oldest, Lisa, is a second-year medical student in Brooklyn. Her middle child, David, is a graduate of Boston University and is living in Boston. The youngest, Kim, is going to be a junior in George Washington University in Washington. And Kim is living kind of an interesting life too, because she's now on a cruise with her family. When she comes back from the cruise, she's going to Israel on the Birthright trip, which I guess is a fantastic trip for college students, and she's very, very excited about that. And when she goes back to school, she now is going to be an intern for Senator Hagel as part of her career in Washington. So she's living a very interesting life, and they have a good Jewish family and a good Jewish life in Omaha, and that's what brings me back there frequently to see them, because that's a very important part of my life. Going back to Howard, when Howard graduated from the University of Nebraska and wasn't quite sure what he wanted to do, at the time Nick Newman was my friend, and I asked Nick if he would talk to Howard, just maybe to give him some guidance of where to go. Nick hired him for the Hinky Dinky stores and put him to work doing an orientation manual for new employees. And Howard has stayed in the supermarket business ever since. He's gone to a number of places, and for the past 10, 12 years, I guess, has been a vice president of real estate for Safeway stores. He has the Denver and the Phoenix assignments, so he's in Phoenix at least once a month, and I get to see him. The connection between Omaha and Phoenix never stops. My son Jerry was having a tough time when he got out of college, and we encouraged him to come to California and try his luck there. So he came to California, and in the process of living with us, he met this young woman who lived in the same apartment complex and found out that they had graduated high school together. And they started dating and were married 6 months later. Lorraine was not Jewish, but a lovely person, and they had a good marriage. They've been married 27 years. Right before their 25th anniversary, Lorraine decided that she should be Jewish. And she went to the temple and had a conversion, went through the whole business of a bat mitzvah and a conversion, and we were privileged to be at both of those events. They live in Nashville. And then she decided she really wasn't married until she could be married Jewishly. And she did go to the mikveh, and when she came out to Phoenix, she was married at our synagogue by our rabbi 2 years ago. They've been married 27 years. They have no children, but they have a wonderful Jewish life. She's now on the board of her temple. I predict in a couple of years she'll be president of that temple. As a result, she's made my son more Jewish, who forgot where he came from, but now he has to go to temple with his wife because everybody knows her. So they go to temple, and they know that Lorraine is a big wheel, and Jerry's her husband. So that's good. The other interesting story about Jerry is he had serious health problems with diabetes, and was losing the function of his kidneys and was on dialysis and was not doing well on it, and really felt that if he had to stay on dialysis, he wasn't going to live, and he needed a transplant. To get on the list for transplants took forever. My son Howard couldn't give his because his blood type was different, and he also had some other health problems. I couldn't do it because I only had one kidney. And it wound up that Marcia was the one that might possibly be the donor. And she was tested, and she was a perfect match. And it was a big decision for her to make because, while you can live with one kidney, it's still major surgery. But she did make the decision that she was going to do this for her brother. And I guess the worst day and the best day of my whole life is when these 2 kids went into surgery at the same time. I stood and watched them go into separate operating rooms, and an eternity later, the doctor came out and said, well, they're both fine, and it worked. And so Jerry is now living with Marcia's kidney, and it's brought them much closer together. He calls her to wish her a happy birthday and tell her that he's taking care of her kidney on her birthday. So they have a nice relationship with it. Marcia is a very special young woman. She had a long range plan. She graduated. From the University of Texas, I guess. After Steve got out of college, he went to work in Texas, and she finished her schooling there. And she had a long range plan. She knew that, interestingly enough, she was a teacher. She was a Spanish teacher, but she didn't know Spanish very well, so she kept one step ahead of her students. And she went back to teach at Westside High School, where she had gone to school. She did have a long range plan. She knew that she wanted to be a stay-at-home mother, which she was, but she also knew that once her kids were out of the house, she wanted to do something else. So it took her 6 years, but she got her master's degree in family counseling, and now works as a family counselor in Omaha a couple of days a week, which is kind of rounds out her life between taking care of her house and her involvement in the Jewish community. She's now a family counselor. We spent 16 years in Southern California, where Mort was the executive director of that small federation. And because of my background, of course, I got involved as a volunteer in the Jewish community. After 16 years, it was time for us to retire, and the question was, where do we go to retire? I knew that I could not go back to Omaha, where I really would love to be with my daughter and my grandchildren, but I couldn't handle the weather there. At the time, my sister, who is still alive, was a part-time visitor in Scottsdale. Mort's son, Alan, who is a doctor, was starting his family in Scottsdale, so it was normal that we would choose to come here where there were going to be grandchildren around. And that's how we wound up in Scottsdale, and it's been a very happy choice for us. Interestingly enough, you never lose Omaha, no matter where you are. And in Scottsdale, there's an Omaha group. The men meet on one day and have lunch together. The women meet on another day. In season, we can have as many as 17 women, all of whom live here permanently or are visitors, and the Omaha groups get together to talk about what's happening in Omaha. You never really lose touch, so it's been a good life for us. We've enjoyed Alan and his family, who now has 3 kids, but I'm sure Mort will talk more about them. And Mort's still involved in Jewish stuff. And now as a volunteer, he's getting a kick out of that because he can be a volunteer and leave. He's been vice president of our temple and been very involved in some of their activities. I've been less involved. In closing, I'd like to say that I've had a very good life. I had wonderful parents, a wonderful sister, a wonderful family life while I was growing up. My life with my kids has been very special. My grandchildren have been very special. I celebrated my 80th birthday last month, and I'm in relatively good health and enjoying life, loving my kids, loving my grandchildren. What more can I ask? And so to all my kids, I say, I love you up to the sky, and thank you for making my life worthwhile.